Welcome everyone to the inaugural installment of the A&A Legacy Series, in which we get acquainted with the legends, heroes, and icons of the numismatic hobby and celebrate the lives and contributions of our members. I am your host, Barbara Gregory. Today our guest is professional numismatist Fred Weinberg of Encino, California. Actively involved in the hobby and industry for more than 40 years, Fred is respected for his knowledge of United States coins, particularly mint errors. He is a contributor to the Red Book and a co-author of the Error Coin Encyclopedia and 100 Greatest U.S. Error Coins. Born in Los Angeles in 1950, Fred is the second oldest of 3 children. He has a 26-year-old daughter. Welcome, Fred. We are delighted you could join us today.
Thank you, Barbara.
So, Fred, let's start at the beginning. What were you like as a child?
I think you would probably say, at least my mother would say, that I was probably precocious. I was inquisitive, and but I grew up in a very typical, I think, middle-class American home in Los Angeles.
I understand that you have an older brother and a younger sister. What was it like being the middle child?
It actually, I think, gave me a good balance, and I kind of characterized my relationship as the middle child by telling this anecdote. It's a generalization, but I remember that when my parents would tell my older brother to do something, he would say, okay, and he'd go do what he wanted to do. They'd tell my younger sister to do something, and she would say, okay, because she was young enough to respect and listen to what her mother and father said. They'd tell me to do something, and I'd look at them and I'd go, why? I wanted a reason.
Did you get a weekly allowance when you were a child?
My first allowance that I recall was 25 cents a week.
And what did you do with that? Did you save it? Did you spend it?
Initially, I remember saving it, and I have a very distinct memory of putting my quarters and my dimes and even money that I could make or find in a little can, like a soup can, bank. And I remember probably when I was maybe 6 or 7 years old, I opened up that can and I had $2.35 in it, and I remember thinking, that's all the money in the world.
And so, do you remember what you bought at that time?
You know what? It wasn't until probably I was 9, 10, 11 that I would spend my own money, because at that time my parents would take me, we'd go someplace and they would pay for everything. I don't have any distinct memory of spending money buying things, particularly until I started buying coins at a local coin shop when I was probably 11 or 12 years old.
And at that time, obviously you were attending school. What kind of school did you attend? I
went to elementary school, what we call junior high school, today called middle school and high school, in the Crenshaw area of Los Angeles, where my parents lived till I was 16. And I would say I was probably an average, maybe slightly better than average student. My parents insisted that I do the homework when I came home. I couldn't put it off till later in the evening. I had to do it when I came home. So I was a decent student.
What was your favorite subject?
Probably history. I was fascinated with ancient history, even the Civil War at the time, and I do remember, and I actually still have this book. My parents gave it to me in 1959, so I was 9 years old. It was a book called Myths and Legends of the Ages, and I can remember reading that book over and over again and just being fascinated with not only the myths, but just life and culture going back thousands of years.
Well, you started collecting coins when you were 12. Obviously, some of that interest was sparked by your interest in history.
Right.
But what other factors got you interested in collecting coins?
I remember as a Boy Scout, I think you had to collect stamps, and you did something with stamps. And I had a stamp collection, but one day at a scout meeting, we were doing something with clay, and a chunk of clay got on one of my stamps, and it ruined the stamp. And I said to myself, well, I don't know if I want to collect something that's made of paper that can be damaged so easy. And I know that I was interested in things that I found in my pocket change, and for some reason I just gravitated towards coins pretty early after I got out of Cub Scouts and playing with stamps.
Did you make a point to ask your folks what they had in their pockets on a regular basis?
For the most part, yes. And a few years later, I would check everybody's change. I had a desk in my little bedroom with a light, and I would look at everything. And at that time, you could find what we call BIEs, a blob of metal between the L and the I of Liberty, or the I and the V of Liberty, or die cracks. And I just found those anomalies to be fascinating because they were different.
Did you know at the time what you were looking at?
I kind of knew because I subscribed to Coin World, and I immediately, when each issue came out, I would turn to the last page, which was Collectors Clearinghouse, written by James Johnson. And it was to see pictures, it was only black and white at that time, but to see pictures of any type of an error coin, and then Jim's explanation of them, I just soaked it up like a sponge. It just, for some reason, the minting process and how something could go wrong attracted me at an early age.
About that time, did your folks start taking you to the coin shops, or
Yes.
to the bank even?
Not so much to the bank, but on occasion, if my father or my mother would make a deposit, they'd bring back a couple of rolls of pennies or nickels to go through. And I could ride my bike to a couple of the local coin shops, and I would haunt them and see what they had. And I couldn't afford very much at that time.
When you were a teenager, did you have any heroes or role models?
No, you know what? I can't say that I did at that time. As I got, again, a little bit older, and music became very important, I would say a hero to a degree would be somebody like Bob Dylan, who to me is still very important to me just because of the way he paints pictures with words. So I would say Bob Dylan was somebody that I respected and looked up to and was profoundly affected by.
Since you were a regular at some of these coin shops, did any of the dealers become your mentors or give you any advice?
Well, I would say that the dealers, I don't know if they became my mentors, but the dealers were friendly enough at the coin shop. At that time, nobody was interested in error coins. So they either didn't have very many errors, or they would allow me to go through their junk box looking for something that would be an error.
Did you know what you wanted to be when you grew up?
No, to be honest with you, at that point, I just assumed I would high school, go to college, and I'd get a job, but I never really had a direction or a desire for a particular career when I was 10 to 15 or 16 years old.
Early in your collecting career, you mentioned that you were intrigued by error coins. What is it about such coins that appeals to you and other collectors?
I think the fact that most coins are normal, they're round, except for the last digit of the date, the mint mark. And I was interested as a young kid in flying saucers and parapsychology, just things that were different. I found the concept of life on other planets interesting. And I think errors, for some reason, fit into that off-center view of, let's say, culture or of the world. And to find something different on a coin, even at the time, a minor die crack, a blob letters, something today that is very common to find in copper coins, it just attracted me immediately because it was something different.
How were you able to pursue that as a youngster?
Probably mostly going through, again, pocket change, going to coin shops, reading a lot. I read, even to this day, I'm a vociferous reader. So I would read and absorb as much as I could. And I probably had a fairly early understanding of the minting process, mainly from reading Collectors Clearinghouse at that time. And then later on, there were people like Mort Goodman, Arnie Margolis, and Sid Cass, who was still up in Stockton, who were probably my mentors in the coin business when I was 11, 12, 13 years old, that encouraged me to get active in the National Error Club at that time.
Did you assemble a fairly good library for yourself at that age?
I would say I had a pretty decent library. There weren't a lot of books
No.
on error coins. There was a book by Frank Spadone, which I loved reading, and it wasn't until probably 6 or 7 or 8 years later that I realized a lot of those coins were damaged or altered, and a lot of the photographs were altered. But that was pretty much the only error books. There was a book by Michael Coleman on Indian Head penny errors and Lincoln cent errors. But aside from Collectors Clearinghouse, there really wasn't much information on the minting process.
That's right. What would you say was a turning point in your career and your life?
That's real easy to answer. I remember when I was 21, it was probably December 1971, I was 21 and a half, and I was at my parents' house baking chocolate chip cookies with my girlfriend, and I got a call from a local coin shop, Jonathan's Coins, which was in Inglewood, and I had been driving over there probably almost every week, participating in his bid board, looking at errors that he might have, and he said to me, "There's somebody here with an error collection, and I want you to come out here and buy it for me." No one had ever said that to me before, so I left the chocolate chip cookies and drove to Inglewood, and there was a gentleman who I know to this day. His name is Jim Lehman. He was a mail order error dealer from Parma, Ohio, and he had been driving out west, and he ended up in Modesto, California, working for an insurance company, and I have all of my insurance policies with him, and I'm still friends with him today. But he wanted to sell his error inventory because he was getting out of the mail order business. Jonathan put me in a conference room with him, and I remember saying before I went in, "Jonathan, how am I supposed to do this?" And he said to me, "Buy it so that I can make money." I had never done anything like this before in my life. I was very nervous. I went into the room and negotiated with Jim, who was a dealer who knew a lot more about the market than I did. And I believe I bought his inventory for about $2,100, which was a lot of money in 1971. When we finished the transaction and Jonathan paid Jim Lehman and he left, Jonathan came up to me and he said, "I like the way you did that. Do you want to come to work for me?" Until he uttered those words, I had never thought, the concept of me being a coin dealer never had crossed my mind. But the second he said it, I knew that's what I wanted to do. That was an incredibly impactful moment. And I immediately said yes. And then it took me probably 3 or 4 days to come up with the nerve to tell my parents that I was dropping out of college after 3 years to become a coin dealer. At that time, with the exception of Kossoff, Abner Kreisberg, Jerry Cohen, Stax, Paramount Coin, there weren't that many national dealers that I was aware of, and all of the coin shops were kind of dark and dungy, and everybody smoked cigarettes, and the places looked like a mess. And I had no idea what I would do, but when he said, "Do you want to come to work for me?" I said yes. So it took me 4 days to tell my parents I was dropping out of college, and they were not happy whatsoever, but it was the best decision that I ever made.
How long did you work with him?
I worked with him only for about a year, and what happened was there was a gentleman named Harry Gordon who had a business in Beverly Hills, and Harry would come in with a briefcase, and at that time it was just the beginning of the hard asset mentality. You need to buy gold or silver coins because one day a silver quarter is going to buy a loaf of bread or a gallon of milk. And we all kind of said, well, that's crazy, but if you look today, it takes a silver quarter's value to buy, a quart of milk or a loaf of bread. And Harry would come in and he would try to sell me, to put in the showcase, French 10-franc golds, Swiss 20 francs, and sovereigns and Dutch guilders. They were about $10 at the time. And Harry was pretty intimidating because he would say, well, last week you bought 5 of each of these and you have 1 left of these, none of those, and 2 of those. You need more. So he would make me buy them, and of course we'd sell them during the week and he'd come back. Over a period of a year or so, there were times when I had to go into Beverly Hills to their office to sell them some of the US gold that we might have bought over the counter. So one day I go into the office, about a year later, I'm talking with Harry and his partner, and they started asking me questions like, look, do you enjoy what you're doing at Jonathan's? Yes. Do you like what you're doing every day? Yes. Everything they asked me, I kept on saying, yes, I love it, yes, I love it. Finally, Harry looked at me and he says, you're not getting the point of my questions. I'm trying to see if you're maybe a little unhappy and you'd like to come to work for us. So I was very naive. I didn't get the point that he was trying to make. But once he said, I'm offering you a job, I did that. I quit Jonathan's after about a year, and then I ended up working for Numismatics Limited in Beverly Hills for almost 14 years.
Working for them, is that when you began to travel to Europe?
Yes, Harry had contacts in Switzerland and London, in Paris, all over Europe, and probably my 2nd year into working there, I started going with Harry, and we'd go probably every 6 to 8 weeks to London, Paris, Germany, Zurich a lot, buying US gold, large quantities of US gold. And because of Harry's relationship with this gentleman, Heiner Stucker, at that time, we could drive around in Heiner's car to all the different cities in Switzerland, go to different banks and coin dealers, and at that time the banks had a lot of coins. And when we would tell the bank that we had a check from Heiner Stucker, and they would look outside and we were driving his BMW, that was very, very important. It showed a relationship with Stucker, who also used to work at the banks in the 1950s after World War II. So we could pick up hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of coins and either write a Heiner Stucker check, or Heiner would wire the money that same day. So on these trips in a week, we were buying $1.5 million to $2 million worth of US gold when 20s were $200 to $300 or $400.
And you made these trips 150 times?
Yeah, approximately 150 times from 1974 to the late 1990s.
And now these days, as an error coin dealer, you have an inventory that exceeds 100,000 pieces. How do you come by them, both your common errors in large quantities and the single, more rare pieces?
Well, the single pieces I'm offered because I've been doing this long enough and advertising enough that people know that they can come to me, and I know that the coin is real and I can appreciate a single rare coin. As far as the bulk pieces, probably in the 50s and 60s and up till the mid-70s, banks were the source of errors, because the banks would get a 5,000 coin bag of Lincoln pennies, let's say, and they'd bust it open, they'd run it through a counting machine to put into paper wrappers, and they would find the errors, and various bank tellers, either current bank tellers or retired people, would contact me and I'd buy the coins from them. In the mid to late 90s, it changed where the mintages were going up, and apparently banks didn't want to do it. It just wasn't lucrative for them. So the mints made arrangements with what we call counting rooms or rolling rooms, Brinks, Loomis, Dunbar, to take their bags and for them to roll the coins. And they would go through huge quantities, much more so than a single particular bank. And the error coins, they'd either find them, they would jam the rolling machines, and those guys from all over the country would call me and I would buy whatever they happened to have. Sometimes they would have, hundreds of off-center pennies, and sometimes they would just have a series of double-struck coins or nickels on pennies. But they became my best sources, and even to this day, if I get a phone call from a gentleman and he says, I have errors that I got 20 years ago, what types of errors do you have? And they start to describe the errors to me, I will say to him, did you work for Loomis, Brinks, or Dunbar? And I could hear their jaw drop on the phone. Well, how did you know? I go, because that's the type of material
Right.
that was found. So
Right.
that they've become the best sources.
Over your 4 decades as a coin dealer, what's the biggest surprise you've ever had?
The biggest surprise as far as being in the coin business?
Coin related, or your most memorable acquisition?
Well, I remember going to, it's hard to pick one, but a couple of highlights. I remember going to Paris and buying from a private dealer 3 1870 CC $20 gold pieces that today are $350,000 to $500,000 or $600,000. We paid $8,000 to $10,000 each for the 3 of them, depending on it. We bought some really neat deals. I bought original bags of $5 Liberties, 1,000 coins, $10 Liberties. But in general, I would say one of the biggest surprises I've had being a coin dealer is that I never expected that being a coin dealer, coming to coin shows all around the country, that I would get to see every human characteristic and every human trait that you could possibly imagine. If you name an adjective word about a human being, their politics, their religion, their morals, their ethics, you name the human trait, we see it on the bourse floor every show. And that was educational, it was interesting, and it was very unexpected. I thought I would be dealing with coin people, but it made me realize that coin people, much more so than, let's say, doctors or lawyers, anybody can be a coin collector or a coin dealer. So the spectrum of variety of human psychology, human characteristics, that's probably been my biggest and one of the most pleasurable surprises.
And when someone comes to your table, you have no idea who they are, what they're like, and those type of people are always full of surprises. So.
Yes, but, most of the people that come to a coin show that have an error coin and they're sent over to my table, the majority of time it's a coin that's been damaged or altered in circulation, because people have a tendency to think that anything they find in their pocket change that's different has to be an error, and in many cases has to be rare and has to be valuable. So it's my job to explain to them that it was hit with a hammer, it was plated, it was run over by a train, it was corroded, it was in some way what we call post-minting damage. And I try to let them down as easy as possible by explaining what occurred. And in most cases, the vast majority of cases, they understand. They're disappointed, but they understand.
How does your family feel about your profession and your passion for numismatics?
I think my family's proud of me because, like myself, I don't think they had any concept when I told them I'm going to drop out of college to become a coin dealer, that a few years later I'd be traveling to Europe, I'd be going to coin shows, I've been to the Orient, I got involved with the China Mint, I had my own programs with the China Mint from 1989 to the mid-90s, and I think my father passed away in 1989, but I think my mother and my brother and my sister and my daughter are very proud of what I've done, because they've seen that you can turn a hobby into a profession. And I consider myself very lucky because a lot of people just don't have the opportunity to do that.
Fred, what do you think you have the most of? Talent, intelligence, education, or persistence?
I think I'd have to say persistence. Persistence and enthusiasm. Because I don't think I'm exceptional in my education. I might have a talent for looking at a coin with a magnifying glass and placing my knowledge of the minting process to that coin, but I don't believe I'm exceptional in any way except for my enthusiasm and my persistence in wanting to learn about coins and the minting process.
And I suppose that the way that those traits have helped you is pretty obvious in numismatics and in your life in general.
Yeah, well, being a coin dealer, you become not only just a businessman, but you become more analytical about things. And so it affects my life in the sense that I've noticed coin dealers, compared to some of my other cousins or family members, I have a much more security-minded mentality. when it comes to traveling or driving home late at night, I'll keep an extra eye in the rearview mirror to make sure nobody's following me. It's not paranoia. It just becomes part of your being that you become more security conscious, which is a good thing.
Speaking of security, have you ever had any close calls in that regard?
No, I've been lucky. Some of my friends have had some close calls, but maybe because I've been lucky or been aware, and that I use Brinks from my coin shows, I've never had a physical altercation or physical threatening situation.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
What do you know now that you wish you'd known when you were younger?
Relating to the coin business, I would say, I guess I wish, and I don't have too many regrets, but I guess I would say that I never realized, as much as I loved mint era coins, that in the past 20 years they would become so accepted, so appreciated, so studied, that they're a whole major segment of the coin market today. When I started, people love to look at my era coins in a showcase, but everybody would say, that's fantastic. How do I know it's real? Well, with PCGS, NGC, and Annex certifying era coins, it lends a comfortable level that literally didn't exist. And so the people that collected coins at that time either had to really trust me or the other era dealers, or know the minting process themselves so that they knew what they were buying wasn't a damaged or post-damaged coin.
These days, what is your typical day like, and how is it different from decades ago?
These days, I get up at 5 o'clock in the morning, 7 days a week, anywhere in the world, even on vacation. And that's because when I started Numismatics Limited in January of '72, I had to be in Beverly Hills at about 20 to 7, which was 20 minutes to 4 o'clock in Europe, and I would spend that 20 minutes calling as many banks and coin dealers, finding out what they had and buying coins, having them shipped to me. After a couple of years, I think my body clock adapted to getting up early, and so that's why, for literally since I was probably 24, 25 years old, I get up at 5 in the morning. Today I go into the office, and I actually liked it because it was quiet back then. At 7 o'clock on the West Coast, there's not a lot going on. I could get more work done. Today, I obviously turn on the computer, check my emails, check my website to see what's going on, and then I spend the day answering phone calls, processing packages, organizing my inventory, getting it ready to be put online, because that's a very important thing today, putting your inventory on your website. Whereas 30 or 40 years ago, I would come into the office and we'd have local LA dealers come in to pick the gold coins that I had just gotten from Europe, either coins that I had physically bought and shipped back, or coins that I bought over the phone. And at that time, then, you didn't grade the coins as much as whoever the first person was paid $200 for gem, $20 St. Gaudens. The second person might pay $190, $195. And as the quality got down, you just lowered the price, $10 or $15 a coin. And I went to a lot more coin shows at that time too. At that time, I would say at least 2 to 3 times a month for 11 months, not counting December, were coin shows all over the United States. So it would be traveling to the shows, coming back, working on your inventory, processing coins. Now today I still process coins, but I'm doing less coin shows and more computer work.
You mentioned that you really didn't have any regrets, but would you change anything, either in your professional life or your personal life?
Absolutely not. I'm the type of person that I believe that you have to experience life, and there's bumps in the road, and my philosophy or my attitude is, when you come to a problem, you either make a left and go around it, you make a right and go around it, or you step over it. You address the issue. So I can't say I regret anything. And when I think about some of the fantastic era coins that I've handled over the years, I have a teeny regret that I didn't save a couple of them, or save more than I should have. But I realized very early in my career that if you're a coin dealer, you can't collect what you deal in for two reasons. One, you go broke buying all the neat coins that you have access to. And number two, if you do buy them for yourself, you take away the profit from either your company or the company that you're working for. So most coin dealers that do have an interest in coins collect series that they don't deal in any way, shape, or form, so that there's no conflict.
Well, thank you, Fred. Now let's open up the floor to audience questions.
Scott Griffin, Sassoon City, California. Good morning, Fred. Good morning, Ms. Gregory.
Good morning.
Several questions, Fred. First, I know your personal account probably coincided with your time working at Numismatics Unlimited. How did that personal account exist? When did it go from maybe insignificant, maybe early on, to where it started becoming something to where you said, wow, this is, I've had a significant error coin collection here, or maybe something else. Second question is the frontier of gold coins, US or any kind of gold coins in Europe, does that still exist, or are most of those deals gone? And third, how do you, why don't you go with the first two first, and then maybe someone else ask them questions.
I'll answer the second question first, which is that, yes, there are still hordes of gold coins in Europe. I don't participate in that market anymore. When I was doing it, it was like the golden age of coins. I mean, the stories I could tell of finding gem, lustrous 10 Indians and 10 libs, MS-60, 5, 6, and 7 coins today, almost doesn't exist anymore. There are dealers that live in Europe that work for major companies that buy the coins and import them. So there's still gold coins there, but it's much more competitive, and the dealers in Europe have educated themselves, and in the 70s where I could buy 500 $20 gold pieces, and they were either what they called first quality or second quality, new or used, and I would get the premium for the nicest coins to the first person who would come in the office to buy them. That's not the case anymore, because the dealers in Europe that have them, they know what MS-65 means, they know what PCGS and NGC means. So it's more difficult to make as much money today as it was back 30 or 40 years ago. But the coins are still there. There's a lot less of them, but you'd be surprised how many coins are there. Your first question, I wasn't quite sure what you mean as far as the significance of, or what happened to me. If you could rephrase the first question.
Well, I'm sure that your employment first at Jonathan's and then with Numismatics Unlimited was, you were being paid a wage and you were buying coins and selling coins on behalf of the firm. But I'm sure that also existed your own personal collection. And how did those companies allow you to engage with what they came across? And then as you started building over the years, how did that particular personal account grow and change?
Well, I was very lucky in the sense that Harry Gordon, who was the owner of Numismatics Limited, would allow me to buy a couple of coins a year. So I put away a few coins a year, not on a regular basis, error coins that I still have today. And it became, again, as I said earlier, you can't collect and deal in the same thing. So I would buy a few coins. If I can add to the regrets that I have, which I kept on saying none, I wish I had kept more of the coins that I had dealt with in the 70s. But over a period of time, after I started my own business in 1985, I began to buy from certain sources so many coins that, especially in the 1999 and 2000 era, just recently, 15 years ago, that more coins were coming on the market from the mints that could be absorbed. So I just started putting them away because I knew they were good value. So as part of my 100,000 pieces of error coins, I have 10,000 partial collar and broad struck pennies, which is not a big deal. But I also have probably 30 or 35,000 dated off-center pennies. The mint hasn't made, in general, off-center pennies in 15 years, since 2001. And I realized then that if they're not going to make them because of these new horizontal Schuler presses, that's a wonderful thing to put away, because the perceived value, if you show an off-center penny to anybody, whether it's a collector at a coin show or a cousin or a niece or a nephew. Most people, I've been doing this for 40 years, what do you think that's worth? Almost everybody says, that's gotta be worth $50, that's gotta be worth a few $100s. So I realized, if they're $10 coins, but everybody says they're cool and they're neat and the mint isn't making them anymore, I'm just gonna put them away. So coin dealers are known for hoarding certain things that they deal in because they have a perception that it's a good deal to put away at that price. I've done that with error coins. Today, there's certain things I won't sell that I have in quantity, but what's interesting is that even though I started doing this 15 or 20 years ago, today there's marketing companies that need quantities of any type of coin, and I have more error coins, whether they're $5 coins or $10 or $20 coins, in quantity than anybody else. So the marketing companies will come to me and they'll say, what do you have that's cheap in quantity and dramatic? And I tell them I can get you 2 out of 3. I can get you quantity and cheap, but they're not going to be dramatic. I can get you dramatic, but they're not going to be cheap, and I can't get the quantity. So my inventory works depending on who's looking for what, and I'm very happy to have that many coins because again, I'm a great believer in a common off-center penny. Everybody loves them.
Another question?
Hi, my name is Steve Bobbitt. Fred, this is a real simple question. What did the girlfriend think about you becoming a coin dealer?
Well, my current girlfriend, Leslie, it's interesting that you bring that up. We've been dating for 7 years, and she's always told me that she thinks I'm so incredibly intelligent, and I just kept on telling her, no, I'm just a coin dealer. And I realized she was an actress for many, many years, and she was used to dealing with actors, comedians, and compared to, I guess, actors or comedians, coin dealers as business people are much more down to earth and logical. She calls me pragmatic, the most pragmatic person that she's ever met. And she made me realize that I guess coin dealers, just as businessmen, are very different than other professions that you don't have to deal with either the public as much one-on-one or deal with money issues or economic issues or inventory issues. So she thinks I'm very special, and I just think I'm a coin dealer.
And your high school friend, the one that you abandoned when you were making chocolate chip cookies, what were her feelings about that?
Actually, I remember her parents' feelings were, he wants to be a coin dealer. We actually broke up probably a few months after that because her parents just didn't think there was a future in it. And to be honest, I didn't know if there was a future. It was something I knew I wanted to do the second I was offered the job, but I had no vision, no concept of what it would turn out to be. So my entire life has been a surprise, especially the first couple of years.
Another question out here?
Fred, I appreciate you sharing your background. I can relate so much to what you went through. Were you involved, or did you encounter any of the Philadelphia Mint employees that were creating mint errors, spectacular mint errors, and introducing them to the coin shows on the Bourse floor? Like the $1.25 mules that snuck out?
No, I never met any of those people. I have taken what we call floor tours of the Denver Mint, the Philadelphia Mint, the West Point Depository, and later the West Point Mint. And I met a lot of the people that worked at the Mint when I took these tours, which enabled me and Dave Kammeyer, Rich Schemmer, a few other people, to examine the minting process, which was very instrumental and very necessary to understand how coins are made as the technology improved. But as far as meeting any of the Mint employees outside of the day that I was there, I never did, except for if they would show up at a coin show like here. But those people that come to the coin shows generally aren't the press operators or the die operators.
And you weren't called in to be like an expert witness saying, there's no way these could have been made without help?
No, because believe it or not, I don't believe there was ever a case for, if you're talking about the mules, I believe that there was someone that was charged with conversion of mint property for having the mules. But my understanding was that the mint found out that they had made these mules with the state quarter avers, the Sacagawea dollar reverse on a Sacagawea planchet, and the Philadelphia Mint has a wrapping facility, I think a half a mile away, within a mile or two of the mint. And when word got out that the mint had made this error and they destroyed all these bins, again, my information was that people at this facility, which was outside of the mint, that's where they found some of the coins that have turned up on the market. And so they weren't, the one gentleman who I believe did get caught wasn't charged with stealing coins from the Philadelphia Mint. He was charged with conversion, which I believe is just ownership or having in your possession something that was stolen. It's a fine line, obviously, but the Mint, they actually issued a press release at the time, and with the exception of this one person who took these coins out of this wrapping facility, I don't believe anybody was ever fired or charged criminally with it.
Do you believe the story about the 15 mules that came out of the USPS vending machine?
But that's an interesting question. When the first coin was found in Mountain Gate, Arkansas, which caused all the national publicity, that coin was consigned to the ANA, which happened to be in Philadelphia in 2000. The coins were made, from what we can determine, in May of 2000. The first one was found in a roll in Mountain Gate, Arkansas in June. Publicity went nationwide. That coin was consigned to the ANA auction, and it was expected to bring $75,000, maybe $100,000. 2 weeks, possibly 3 weeks before the ANA, Coin World published a story that somebody went to a postage machine and got 15 or 18 mules in a row changed after buying $2 worth of stamps. And they published that story, and that of course scared everybody, thinking that they would be all over the country. And I remember that both Dave Bowers and myself walked up to Beth Deischer at the ANA, and we said, how could you print that without verification? Because if you think about it, if you're going to get 15 mules out of 18, let's say, in change from a machine, what are the odds of that happening? That would mean that the entire bag would have to be, or almost the entire bag would have to be filled with mules. Well, it turned out that story was fake. None of those coins ever surfaced, and the coin in the auction a few days later brought $29,000.
Okay. Thanks for sharing your experiences.
Thank you, everyone, for your questions. Finally, Fred Weinberg, in numismatics and in life, what would you like your legacy to be?
I don't know if I deserve a legacy. I mean, as far as my personal life, I'd like to be known as a straightforward, good-humored guy and I'm very proud of my daughter. We're raising a wonderful daughter. And as far as coins, I guess I'd like to be remembered as someone who tried to share his knowledge of the minting process and help people that would come to coin shows or call me or email me to let them know that coins that they think are errors because they look different, unfortunately aren't what they think they are, because somebody has to tell them at some point that the coin that you think is worth $1,000 is just worth face value. So I want to be I don't want to be the bearer of bad news, but I want to be known as the bearer of true and accurate information.
That's great. Well, thank you, Fred, and thank you all for participating in this first ANA Legacy Series. I want you to watch for future programs tentatively scheduled for filming at the ANA Summer Seminar in June and July in Colorado Springs, and at the ANA World's Fair of Money in Chicago in August. Again, thank you very much, Fred.
Thank you.
Pleasure to have you.
Thank you. I appreciate the invitation.